30 minutes before I went under to save my husband's life, his phone lit up on the chair beside me. He thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I was lying there with an IV already taped into the back of my hand, wearing a paper gown that smelled like bleach, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting them just to keep my mind from racing toward the surgery that was about to split my body open to save the man I had loved for 14 years. My name is Angela Whitfield, and before that morning, I believed my marriage to Robert Whitfield was the one thing in my life that had never needed questioning. We had built something real. 2 kids. A modest brick house in Cleveland with a porch swing he installed himself the summer we moved in. That morning, the nurses moved around me with the practice calm of people who had done this 1,000 times, checking my vitals, confirming my blood type one more time, preparing me for a procedure that would save Robert's life and very likely shorten mine in small, permanent ways I had already accepted. I had made peace with the risk. What I had not made peace with, what I could never have prepared for, was the sound of his phone buzzing against the plastic armrest of the visitor's chair less than 3 feet from where I lay. He glanced at me first. Checked to see if my eyes were closed. Then he reached for it, tilted the screen away from me, and answered in a voice so low I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. I want to tell you I confronted him right there, in that pre-op room, 30 minutes before they wheeled me away to give him a piece of my own body. But I didn't. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, heart pounding louder than the monitor beside my bed, and I listened. What I heard in those next few minutes would follow me into that operating room, through the surgery, through the recovery, through every single day that came after. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Here is what I need you to understand before I take you back to the beginning. This is not a story about a man who cheated on his wife. That story is old and tired and you have heard versions of it 100 times. This is a story about timing. About a woman who spent 18 months preparing to hand over a piece of her own body to save a man's life, only to discover, 30 minutes before the anesthesia took her under, that the man she was saving may have already decided he did not want the life she was about to give him. 3 questions sat in my chest that entire day, and for months after. Who was on the other end of that phone call? Why did Robert time his silence so perfectly, cutting the call the instant he thought I might be watching? And what kind of man lets his wife go through with a kidney transplant knowing what I would eventually find out? I am going to walk you through everything, from the day Robert was diagnosed to the day I finally understood what that phone call meant, and I promise you, the answer is not what you think. There were moments during this story when I believed I understood exactly what was happening, and I was wrong every single time. Stay with me, because the version of this story I believed on the day of my surgery is almost nothing like the version I know now. I met Robert Whitfield in the fall of 2010, at a cookout thrown by my cousin's church in East Cleveland. He was 26 then, working construction during the week and coaching a youth football team on Saturdays, the kind of man who remembered everyone's name after being introduced only once. I was finishing up my associate's degree in medical billing and had sworn off dating for the semester, a promise I broke within 3 weeks of meeting him. Robert had a way of making a room feel steadier just by being in it. His mother, Miss Carolyn, adored me from the very first Sunday dinner, and within 2 years we were married in a small ceremony at Mount Olive Baptist, the same church where his parents had married 30 years earlier. We built our life the way most working families do, one paycheck, and one small decision at a time. Robert eventually started his own contracting business, and I moved from billing into office management at a dental practice downtown. We had our son Marcus in 2014, and our daughter Kayla 2 years after that. Robert coached Marcus's Pop Warner team the same way his own father had coached him, patient with the slow kids, hard on the talented ones. From the outside, and honestly from the inside too, we looked like a family that had figured something out. Neighbors would ask us how we made it look so easy. I used to laugh and say we didn't, we just didn't let each other see us struggle. The first sign that something was wrong with Robert's health came in the spring of 2023, when he started complaining of swelling in his ankles that wouldn't go down no matter how much he propped his feet up after work. He was tired in a way that didn't match a man who had always had more energy than our two kids combined. I pushed him to see a doctor for almost 2 months before he finally went, mostly because Miss Carolyn threatened to drag him there herself. The diagnosis came back as chronic kidney disease, stage 4, likely years in the making and masked by how hard he worked through the fatigue. The doctor told us plainly that without a transplant, Robert was looking at dialysis for the rest of his life, and even then his outlook would be uncertain. I remember sitting in the car in the hospital parking garage after that appointment, both of us quiet, Robert staring straight ahead, with his hands still on the wheel even though the engine was off. He kept apologizing, like his kidneys failing was something he had done to me personally. I told him we would figure it out together, the same way we had figured out everything else. I meant it. I had no idea yet how literally I would end up proving that promise. The testing process to see if I was a match took almost 4 months. Robert's sister Denise offered first, but her blood pressure disqualified her almost immediately. His brother Tyrone was ruled out for unrelated health reasons. I hadn't even considered myself a candidate until the transplant coordinator mentioned, almost in passing, that spouses were tested too. I went through blood work, tissue typing, psychological evaluation, imaging, more blood work, each step bringing us closer to a yes I was terrified to hear and desperate for at the same time. When the transplant team finally confirmed I was a match, Robert cried in a way I had only seen him cry twice before, once at his father's funeral and once at Kayla's birth. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in late January. In the weeks leading up to it, I noticed small things about Robert that I chose not to examine too closely at the time. He started taking calls in the garage instead of the living room. A weekend trip to Columbus for a supply run that used to take him 4 hours started taking him closer to 9. He was more attentive to me than he had been in years, bringing home flowers for no occasion, telling me constantly how much he loved me and how he didn't deserve what I was doing for him. I told myself this was just fear talking, a man facing his own mortality and holding on tighter to the person keeping him alive. I want you to remember that explanation, because it matters later. The morning of the surgery, we arrived at the hospital before 6. Robert held my hand through the entire pre-op process, kissing my forehead every time a nurse stepped out of the room. I was calm, or at least I had convinced myself I was calm, right up until his phone buzzed against the armrest of the chair beside my bed. He glanced at me to check if I was asleep. I kept my eyes shut and my breathing slow. He answered in a whisper I almost missed entirely, but I caught 4 words clearly. I heard him say, "I told you not now." Then silence, then his voice again, lower, sharper, "We'll talk after, not here." He hung up, slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, and by the time I opened my eyes and pretended to just be waking up, his face had already rearranged itself back into the calm, grateful expression I had been looking at for weeks. I did not say anything. I told myself there could be a dozen explanations. A supplier calling about a job. A family emergency he didn't want to worry me with before surgery. I let the nurses wheel me toward the operating room holding onto every one of those explanations like a rope, because the alternative, that something was deeply wrong in my marriage on the single day I was giving my husband a piece of my body, was more than I could hold in my mind 30 minutes before anesthesia. The surgery went well by every medical measure. Robert's new kidney, my kidney, started functioning almost immediately. My own recovery was harder, slower, more painful than the surgeons had prepared me for, and for the first 2 weeks I was too exhausted and too medicated to think clearly about anything beyond getting through each day. Robert was attentive during that time in a way that almost erased what I had heard in the pre-op room. He drove Kayla to dance practice, handled Marcus's homework, brought me tea every evening and sat with me while I fell asleep on the couch. Miss Carolyn told me more than once how lucky I was to have married a man who showed up like that. It was my sister Renee who first said out loud what I had been avoiding. About 5 weeks after the surgery, once I had enough strength to sit up and actually think instead of just survive, I told her what I had heard that morning. She didn't hesitate. She said, "Angela, you need to look at his phone bill." I resisted for another 2 weeks, telling myself I was being paranoid, that recovery had made me emotional and untrusting. But the 4 words I heard him say kept surfacing at odd moments, while I was folding laundry, while I was watching him laugh with our kids at dinner. "I told you not now. We'll talk after, not here. Those were not words you said to a supplier." I finally logged into our shared phone account in March, almost 2 months after the surgery, and found a number that appeared with unusual frequency going back nearly a year, calls that clustered late at night, and during the exact hours Robert claimed to be on supply runs. I didn't recognize the number. I sat with that phone bill for 3 days before I did anything else, running through every innocent explanation I could invent, because some part of me still needed Robert to be the man I had built a life with rather than the man that number suggested he might be. Eventually I did the only thing left to do. I called the number myself, from a blocked line, at 10 in the morning while Robert was at a job site. A woman answered. Her name, I would later learn, was Jasmine. She sounded confused at first, then guarded, then quiet in a way that told me everything before either of us said the words that made it official. I asked her one question. I asked how long she had known my husband. She hesitated, and then she told me 2 years, and that Robert had told her, back in the fall, that he was planning to leave me once his health stabilized after the transplant. I confronted Robert that same night, after the kids were asleep, laying the phone records on the kitchen table between us like evidence in a trial neither of us had agreed to. I expected denial. I expected anger, deflection, the kind of scrambling explanation men reach for when they are caught. What I got instead was worse. Robert sat down across from me, put his face in his hands, and told me the truth almost immediately, like some part of him had been waiting months to finally say it out loud. Yes, there was someone else. Yes, it had been going on for close to 2 years, since roughly the time his health started declining. And yes, he had told her, before my surgery, that he intended to leave me once he recovered, because staying married to the woman who saved his life felt, in his words, like a debt he didn't know how to live inside of anymore. I asked him the only question that mattered to me in that moment. I asked him why he let me go through with the transplant if he already knew he planned to leave. His answer is the part of this story that changed how I understood the entire 18 months leading up to that day. He told me he was afraid that if he backed out, or if the truth came out before the surgery, I would refuse to donate out of anger, and he would die waiting for another match. He said he told himself he would end things with Jasmine after he recovered, that he needed the surgery to happen first, and that he genuinely believed, in some twisted corner of his mind, that he could separate saving his life from ending our marriage as 2 different problems to solve one at a time. Sitting across from him, I understood that the phone call 30 minutes before my surgery had been Jasmine, panicking, telling him she couldn't keep waiting, and Robert telling her to wait until after, not here, because after was when he planned to leave me. He had let me give him an organ while already planning the conversation, where he would tell me it was over. I do not have adequate words for what that realizes in a person. I remember feeling something colder than anger, a kind of clarity that made the rest of the conversation almost easy, because there was nothing left in me to fight for in that moment. In the months that followed, I filed for divorce, a decision that surprised no one who knew the full story and devastated Robert far more than I expected it to. He asked me, more than once, whether I would reconsider given what my kidney meant to his survival, as though the transplant itself had created an obligation I now owed him beyond marriage. I told him the opposite was true. Giving him that kidney was the most selfless thing I had ever done for another human being, and I was not going to let him turn it into a leash. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. Robert remains healthy as of this recording, his transplant functioning normally, my kidney doing exactly what it was designed to do inside a man who no longer shares my last name in any way that matters. Jasmine and Robert are no longer together either, a fact I learned secondhand through mutual acquaintances rather than anything he told me directly. I have come to believe she was never the actual betrayal in this story. The betrayal was a decision Robert made alone, in the weeks before my surgery, to let me walk into an operating room believing I was saving a marriage when I was only saving a man. There is a difference between those two things that I don't think I understood until I lived it. I think about that pre-op room often, the fluorescent lights, the four in my hand, the sound of his phone buzzing on the chair beside me. I think about how close I came to never knowing, if I had simply been asleep the way he assumed I was. People ask me if I regret donating my kidney, knowing everything I know now. I don't. I regret trusting a man who let me make that decision without the full truth in front of me. Those are two very different regrets, and only one of them is mine to carry. I share this story not for sympathy, but because I know there are people watching this right now who have felt that same instinct, that quiet, uncomfortable feeling that something is being kept from them, and who have talked themselves out of trusting it the way I almost did. Trust that feeling. It is usually right. If you were in that pre-op room, hearing what I heard 30 minutes before major surgery, what would you have done? Would you have gone through with it, or would you have stopped everything right there and demanded the truth before they ever wheeled you into that operating room? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if this story affected you the way I think it will, wait until you hear what happened to a woman in Georgia who discovered the truth about her husband on the exact same day she buried her mother. That story is coming soon, so make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss it.